Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with our feature, Forrest Gregg, who died recently at the age of 85. I saw him play many times. What a wonderful football player he was. He was the best lineman on the Green Bay Packers offensive line of the 1960s. He was the key to the Packers sweep. There would have been no Packers sweep without him, and people like Jim Taylor, whose podcast we just did that I refer you to, and Paul Hornung would not have been able to turn those corners without him either. He helped the Packers win 5 championships. He's one of the greatest Packers of all time, one of the greatest offensive linemen of all time, one of the greatest football players of all time. He also coached for a while. He got the Cincinnati Bengals to the Super Bowl once where they lost. He didn't coach very well for the Packers. I think the highlight of his coaching career was when he and Mike Ditka almost came to blows when Ditka was coaching the Bears and he was coaching the Packers. Here's a report on Forrest Gregg.
I always did my best, and that's one thing that I can truthfully say about playing the game. Whatever I was the best I could be.
Forrest Gregg ranks as one of the most accomplished offensive linemen in the history of pro football. A second-round draft pick of the 1956 Green Bay Packers, Gregg started his career at guard on a team that had not experienced a winning season since 1947. But sweeping change was about to occur.
What the hell's going on out here?
It was obvious from the onset when Vince Lombardi came that things were going to be different.
Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. If you look at this play, what we're trying to get is a seal here and a seal here and try to run this play in the alley.
When Gregg lined up at guard, number 75 sealed the inside, cemented the alley, and helped deliver the Packers sweep into legend.
He drew that play up on the board, and he told us, he says, if we're going to be successful, we've got to make this play work. We'd line up, and we'd run that play. People knew what was coming, but they couldn't stop us because we believed in it, and we knew how to execute it, and we had the talent to execute it.
To a team full of future Hall of Famers, Gregg also brought versatility. Through most of his career, Gregg lined up opposite Bob Skoronski at tackle, and his skilled pass protection allowed Bart Starr time to make plays downfield. But when injuries necessitated, Gregg moved inside to guard, where he always seemed to know the best technique.
You, as a starting player on the Green Bay Packer team, were expected to do your job, and there was never any excuse for not.
In 1965, Forrest Gregg did 2 jobs, and performed them both so well that at season's end, he was named an All-Pro guard by one wire service and an All-Pro tackle by another.
Lombardi expected so much from you that if he expected it, it gave me confidence, I know personally, to believe that I could do it. He expected you to win most of the battles that you fought.
Throughout the 1960s, Lombardi's Packers won more battles than any other team. Forrest Gregg was part of it all, starting in 187 consecutive games and 5 championships.
We won the championship in 61 and 62, so we were on pretty much a roll.
They won again in 65, as Gregg's crushing block sealed off pursuit and allowed Paul Hornung to clinch the win in Cleveland.
You can do it 2 years in a row, and maybe things fall in place for you, and sometimes that third one can slip away from you. Now, we won 3 in a row.
The second of which put the Pack in the very first Super Bowl.
To Jim Taylor on a power sweep, cutting back at the 10. Taylor is in for the touchdown.
The third came on one of the coldest days and most famous plays in league history, a moment for which, to this day, Gregg has never received his due.
The center and the right guard, Ken Ballman and Jerry Kramer, were going to double team Jethro Pugh and try to get movement and not give the middle linebacker much space to operate in. And my job as an offensive tackle, I had to cut off penetration of the defensive end. That's what happened.
Takes the snap. He's got the quarterback.
Not want an overtime in that ice. Nobody did.
Ironically, Gregg's finest moment as a coach came on the coldest day in the history of Cincinnati, Ohio.
Wind chill was colder in that game than it was in the Ice Bowl.
Gregg's Bengals toughed it out for a 27-7 win and a berth in Super Bowl 16. His team failed to win the trophy that now bore his former coach's name. But Forrest Gregg had instilled Vince Lombardi's values in a new generation of NFL players.
He came in and gave us direction and discipline when we needed it and turned his team around.
Once you walk through the doors here, the practice field or the stadium, it's all business. That's the way it has to be.
He was able to come into a room of 60, 70 men who were used to being called the dregs of the NFL and tell them they could be somebody, and not just somebody, they could be the best.
Forrest Gregg knew no other way. Perhaps that's why in his famous book, Run to Daylight, Vince Lombardi described his Hall of Fame offensive lineman as, quite simply, the finest player I ever coached.
Little clarification there. Run to Daylight was Jerry Kramer's book, but Vince Lombardi did say that about Forrest Gregg. Here's another great football player, one of the best defensive ends of all time, extremely perceptive observer about football. We did his podcast, Deacon Jones, and he talks about Forrest Gregg.
Forrest Gregg, if you look at the coordination of his feet and hands, which is a sign of a great lineman, or a great football player, basically. But when you get into Gregg, his arm reach, the way he positions himself, his action from left to right, the guy was just fantastic. His movements would cause you a lot of problems. What I mean is putting that helmet in your chest and them feet working, and he drives you out of that hole. He's the best drive blocker I ever seen. He's not like some tackles that, I hit go upside that head with them hands, and then, I'm done with him. He ain't going to be much of a problem that day. Not him. Forrest Gregg, you got to fight for 60 minutes. I ain't going to get no better than that. It ain't going to get no tougher than that. On the practice week, Forrest block was the most important one because Forrest has got to get there into the hole as soon as possible. And he was so great at that. He not only played tackle, he moved him into guard on several occasions. He's fundamentally sound, getting off the ball, coming off the football. I have to really get ready to play a guy like Forrest and to put a lot of work in. There's nobody like that. You look at some of his tapes, and you'll see a fundamentally sound tackle, and that's what put him in camp.
Forrest Gregg, a true immortal of the NFL. Well, we're going to make a brief mention of Georgette Engel, who died recently at the age of 70. She was on a lot of television shows, and she was on Broadway, but she's best known for one role. One of the stock characters on television has always been the ditzy blonde, and she played the 1970s ditzy blonde on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Georgette Franklin Baxter. She and Ted Baxter were originally boyfriend and girlfriend on the show, and then they got married. She was a good foil for all the main characters on the show, always a little smarter than she let on. Here she is with Mary Tyler Moore in a brief segment.
Are you sure all Rhoda would do is just listen? Well, I guess about here is where Rhoda would have made a joke, to sort of relieve the tension. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at jokes. That's okay. I guess I'm just really tense about tomorrow. This priest is playing golf with this rabbi. You don't have to do this. I know another one about a fat lady and a gun. No, it's
One of the characters she was a foil for on the show was Sue Ann Nivens, played by Betty White, the old pro. But in real life, they were good friends, and here they talk about Betty's favorite episode of the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Do we have a favorite moment from Mary Tyler Moore Show?
Well, I think it was when Ted Baxter, married this beautiful child, and she came on the show, and we all just were knocked out by her. And what fascinated us at that time, and still does, what you see is what you get. That's not a character voice. That's our girl.
We're going to move on now to Dan Robbins, who died at the age of 93. He was the man who came up with the concept of painting by numbers, very big in the 50s and 60s. Here's Matthew Bannister, the BBC4 last word on Dan Robbins.
Dan Robbins was the American artist who came up with the concept of painting by numbers. At its height, the company he worked for was producing 50,000 sets a day, leading to some 30 million pictures hanging on the walls of homes around the USA as the craze spread to South America and Europe. Dan Robbins was born in Detroit. During the Second World War, he served in the army and then worked as a freelance artist. His son, Larry, takes up the story.
When he went to work for a company called Palmer Paint, who was initially in the children's poster paint with washable and wipeable sets, and with all the additional leisure time that Americans came upon after the war, he was given the assignment to creates a hobby kit that would be geared more towards adults.
And I remembered reading about Leonardo da Vinci, how he would challenge his art students and apprentices for creative assignments. He would hand out numbered patterns, indicating where certain colors should be used in specific projects. And I thought to myself, boy, what a great idea. Why not do the same thing for anyone who wants to paint their own picture, but can't? What a good idea. Thank you, Leonardo.
The very first piece that he came up with was an abstract that he showed the owner of the company. His name was Max Klein.
So I showed Max Klein how it worked. You put the numbers here, you put the numbers there, here's a numbered outline. We went through all of that. And he said, Dan, I hate abstracts. Abstracts are for people who think they can paint, but they're trying to fake their way through. I hate the subject. And then he turned around with a smile and he said, I hate the subject, but I like the idea.
So just to be clear for people who perhaps don't remember this phenomenon, what was in the set that you bought?
In the set would be a canvas in those days with the numbered outline. There would be the appropriate number of colors and a couple of brushes with instructions.
Got the idea? You put number 14 paint in number 14 section of the canvas. The canvas has been charted for you, and the paints have been mixed for you. All you have to do yourself is the brushwork.
Am I right in thinking that his wife, your mother, was the test painter, the one who tried out the designs?
That's correct.
Did she enjoy it?
I think so. She wasn't much of an art fan herself, but after Dad had preliminarily traced all of the colors, yes, someone had to proof the colors to make sure they were indeed accurate when compared to the original. I think at one time they had close to 70 to 75 artists helping Dad to create these different paint sets. They had somebody who would draw the human body or figures. They had those who were specialists with animals. They had artists who specialized in landscapes and seascapes, things like that.
Now for paint number 15. It's arithmetic for art's sake, and what do you care if the Royal Academy won't accept pictures painted this way? You can always hang your masterpiece on the mantelpiece.
I think they had the slogan, didn't they? Everyone can be a Rembrandt. So I suppose it made everyone feel that they themselves could become an artist.
Dad was very firm on the ability to let people experience art who otherwise would never have the opportunity to pick up a brush, dip it in paint, and enjoy that whole feeling of creating art.
I suppose some critics said it wasn't art because it was painting by numbers.
Again, I don't think he got too hung up on that. Whether it was or it wasn't, I think he was more concerned on giving the people an opportunity to experience art.
And then there was an exhibition celebrating painting by numbers at the Smithsonian in the National Museum of American History in Washington in 2001. What did your father think about that happening?
I think he was thrilled. You know, it was great. We went as a family. We actually saw the very first abstract, called Abstract Number 1, was front and center in the display. Dad did the art for the program that correlated with the museum exhibit, and it was the cityscape of the New York Harbor, including the Twin Towers, and this was in, I believe, March of 2001. Obviously, a few months later, 9/11 happened, and Dad then redid that painting of the New York Harbor, and he changed it slightly, making the Twin Towers as ghost images, and that turned into a paint-by-number kit called Gone But Not Forgotten.
I think the whole idea of being able to give anybody a brush, dip it in paint, and paint a picture themselves where they say, look what I painted, that's the legacy. I think that idea is forever.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Taps. I think as a final tribute to Dan Robbins, we'll play a little Petula Clark. We don't get enough Petula Clark on this show.
So you can come my world with sunshine, yellow